Today we're going to be talking about resources and how plants and animals and all organisms use resources within their environment. So let's start by talking about exactly what a resource is. A resource is some type of substance or object, perhaps, that is required by organisms within an environment. So they're going to need it for growth, for maintenance, for reproduction, for just life in general. So, these resources can be any number of things. And so it could be something as simple as water. It could be something like light. It could be space, okay? Space to grow, or perhaps space to hunt. Whatever it is, it's absolutely essential for this organism to have, and if it doesn't have it, or if it's in short supply, that's going to really limit the growth of the population that's trying to get this resource. So the thing about resources and ecosystems is that within an ecosystem, if one organism utilizes a resource that another organism needs, then that's taking away the resource from one organism, right? Organism A needs a resource. If organism B consumes that resource, it now becomes unavailable to organism A. So because of that, this resource and this battle for resources is what really kind of creates competition within an ecosystem. We're going to have a lot of competition between a finite amount of resources because resources aren't unlimited. Okay, if they were unlimited, then we would have, incredibly large populations living everywhere in the world. When we look at the world, we have areas that have very dense populations, but we also have areas that have very low density populations because the resources there are either very, few in number or they're scattered far apart from each other. So if we look at plants and animals, okay, there are some resources that plants and animals and a lot of organisms share. So we'll take a look at plants and what they need, and we'll take a look at animals and what they need. So plants, if we're talking about photosynthetic plants, they're going to need some water in order to carry that out. They're going to need some good soil to grow in. They're going to need nutrients in that soil. They're going to need light to carry out photosynthesis, okay? And they're going to need space to grow in, okay? They can't just grow in a teeny tiny little space. They're going to get bigger, and so because of that, they're going to need some space. Animals are also going to need water. Okay, they're not really going to be reliant on the soil. They are going to be reliant on nutrients, but that's going to be coming from the food that they eat, which is provided by the plants, right? Whether they're eating plants directly or eating an animal that's eating a plant, those nutrients are just being passed on. And they're also going to need some territory or space to call their own and also to hunt, right? So whether they're a grazing animal that's eating plants or whether they're a carnivore that's eating other animals, they have to have some kind of territory in order to allow them to move around, to either hunt or perhaps stay away from being hunted, right? If they are the prey species, they have to have, the ability to kind of move around and hide from predators, to take refuge when predators come into their area. So, some of these things, all organisms need: water, some source of food, some form of space. So it's not just like, these lists are completely exclusive to one or the other. Water, right? Appearing on both of these. Water is not an infinite resource. Okay, there's only so much water to go around. And when you go and look at areas like in the Serengeti where you have watering holes, okay, that's why you see an enormous variety of organisms coming to these watering holes. You see organisms that may feed on one another all coming together at a watering hole. You may see lions drinking there beside, water buffalo next to elephants, and there's crocodiles in the water, right? And all these animals are kind of, their predator-prey relationships, on display there, but they're all just kind of there to get water. So that's why these watering holes, because the water is so scarce there, they can become a pretty competitive spot, right? They can become a spot where there's a lot of activity, right? Because a group of organisms may come to the water there to drink, and a crocodile says, oh, this organism is going to dunk its head down to the water level, and I'm going to see if I can't snag a free meal. So, you've got to have water to survive those. So it's a benefit to the crocodiles who live in water, Okay, and the other organisms have to just be willing to take that risk because they have to have water. So these resources, like I said, because they're finite, it's really going to drive competition. All organisms have to have resources. They have to have these resources and able to survive. So there's never going to be enough to go around for every single individual, right? The majority of individuals who are competitive, who have the adaptations that allow them to gain access to these resources, they're going to be okay. But for the organisms who may, be missing a step because they're older or weaker or younger, okay, these resources aren't going to be as plentiful. So especially in populations where the young are not receiving a lot of assistance from the older members, okay, then the resources become even more difficult to obtain. So this is where the idea of living in a community is very beneficial for organisms, because the younger individuals can be taken care of by the older individuals, and the elder individuals can also be taken care of by the healthy individuals. So it's that sense of community. They're going to help protect each other. They're going to help provide resources, right? So when a pack of wolves goes out to hunt, they're going to hunt and then they're going to bring that back to the entire pack. The alphas are going to get theirs, and the rest of the members are going to get theirs, and then even the young are going to get theirs if they're eating or if they're feeding off of their mother. But it's all distributed, right? It's not a situation where, well, it's too bad, you're too young to hunt, you're going to die. If they did it that way, then all of the younger members of their populations would die off, and then their species would cease to exist. So it's a very strategic way these organisms do that. If you look in contrast to organisms that don't support their young, right, they're fighting over a lot of resources, but they're doing it without any help. One of the big groups there is fish. Fish lay eggs, right? They lay, somewhere between 5,000, 10,000 eggs at once. All the fish hatch, and in most fish species, there is no assistance there. It is just survive or don't, right? And so those fish now have to kind of figure everything out on their own, just using their instincts. And they have plenty of resources, right, in the ocean. The ocean's a very big place, but they don't have any guidance. They don't have any protection from the mother or father or any of the other. They don't live as a young group. They're not in the same setup as you would say like a pack of wolves, okay? Now, a lot of fish, as they get older, they're going to form schools, okay, and that's going to help them with resources and things like that. That's also going to, though, one of the big benefits there is providing protection from predators, right? Because large numbers, it makes predators, they're not a single target. So they're going to have that safety in numbers working in their favor. All of these resources working together are also going to help determine the carrying capacity of an ecosystem. So remember, that's the maximum number of individuals that an area can support without degrading that environment, right? So we can't just, we can physically fit 200 chimpanzees in this area. Well, if they fit and they're shoulder to shoulder, that's not really the carrying capacity, because they can't move, they don't have space, they don't have all the things they need. So the carrying capacity is going to be greatly impacted by the amount of resources available. And as I've mentioned before, in an area that has a lot of resources because it has a lot of water and a lot of vegetation, we're going to see a much higher carrying capacity in comparing that to an area where water is scarce and therefore vegetation is scarce, and we just see a dramatic drop in carrying capacity. In addition to ecological resources, one thing we also want to include here is the ecological services that are provided, because for a lot of animals, especially plants, these services become resources, right? And they are a form of resource. So the resource are a lot of times like the tangible things, or the things that we can and that we can see. These services would include things like the purification of air and water, right? So water moving through wetlands to become purified, the maintenance of the biodiversity itself, so the maintenance of the trees, and then trees dying and getting recycled, the decomposition of waste, soil and vegetation being regenerated and renewed through all of the passing of these nutrients, pollination is an ecological service that is a very good interest or big interest to plants, because without pollination, they can't survive. Recharging the groundwater supply through wetlands, seed dispersal, right? So plants relying on the wind and other animals to disperse those seeds for them. So all of these services are essential. And like I said, a lot of those are much more important to plants. And you could say, well, they're not important to animals, but remember, without plants, you don't have animals. So these services, these types of things that just simply get done throughout the day in an ecosystem, these things that happen just because of the system and the way that it works, all of these things are really important. So whether it's direct services or actual resources, both of them are absolutely essential to the survival of both groups of organisms.